Today, I'm really excited to have our guest, Dr. Kimberly Weems, here from North Carolina Central University, as our guest. Before we get started, I really want to take just a moment to remind folks the goal of my podcast and Learning for Truth and Love is to really bring a nuanced way of thinking about learning. Oftentimes, we learn about learning from people who might be our influencers, right? Maybe people who are writing, maybe we might learn them from research articles that we read. But oftentimes we don't get a nuanced perspective, especially for different spaces, whether K 12 or even higher education. And so I've been very specific in the guests that I choose, especially when I think about how we combine our lived experience and how it influences what we research, what we teach, how we learn, how we view the world. And so hopefully, my goal in this podcast is to just bring a way of thinking about learning and about the world differently. Okay. So, Dr. Weems, welcome to Learning for Truth and Love. And I always ask, guests, rather than reading your biography, I always find it more interesting for you to talk about yourself.
Okay.
um, and let's start there. I'm gonna have talk about yourself, give some background about yourself, your academic experience, thinking about your qualifications, your research, your teaching of math, um, and your experience in general. Just give us an overview. And just to remind folks, today we're talking about the state of mathematics. So welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Quinlan. Yes, I grew up in Georgia and really always enjoyed math, always enjoyed science in general. I
Nice.
credit my mom for that. She taught middle school science, biology, life science for over 30 years in
Wow.
the Georgia public school system. And I spent
Hmm.
a lot of time after school in her biology lab, just playing around with all of her equipment and playing with her books. And she also on occasion taught math at times.
Nice.
And so that's really where my interests developed. And after high school, I attended Spelman College in
Okay.
Atlanta,
Nice.
majored in math
Hmm.
and minored in Spanish.
Okay.
And really just wasn't quite sure if I was going to major in math actually, but I developed a love for math there
Hmm.
and decided that I wanted to continue my studies with math. I left and went to University of Maryland, College
Hmm.
Park, for my
Okay.
master's and PhD.
Okay.
And formally, officially, I was in the applied math program. My dissertation work is with a statistician.
Oh.
So I say that my research is more on the statistics side, even though my degree formally says applied math. Um,
Nice.
and my research basically looks more at probability distribution. So I would say
Hmm.
even in statistics, most people think of statistics as being very applied and doing a lot of number crunching, data analysis. I
Wow.
really did though focus a little bit more on the theoretical side, and I
Okay.
look at what if people study these standard probability distributions, but what if they really aren't good for representing your data? What can you do? So I look at
Yeah.
ways to tweak those distributions so that you can model your data a little bit better. Um,
Awesome.
After Maryland, I left and I did a postdoc at North Carolina State
Hmm.
University in the
Okay.
statistics department
Awesome.
and worked there in a faculty role for several years before I came to Central.
Wow. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's interesting. I asked you for a little bit more in depth than I usually might ask because I find the journey from math, especially considering it's an important topic in our society, is equally more important, when we think about the journey. And so I'm fascinated. I do have some questions, but I was really intrigued when you said, you were in your mom's lab, life science, because it's now I'm thinking, wow, your mom is to me as I am to my son, right?
Yes, absolutely. Hmm.
Because I find myself, even though I would take my son with me to different things, conferences, and have him do, play with experiments and tools and stuff like that, and do, I'm more biology. I emphasize the math with him, and giving him special math experiences. So I'm so curious before I start these questions, what do you think, in that experience, with your mom and the lab, was there a carryover? Was there something about that experience that might have facilitated or piqued your interest in math, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is interesting that I ended up going more of the math route
Hmm.
than because I did spend so much time. Um, so I mentioned from time to time she did teach math,
Hmm.
and so she still had a lot of math books,
Mm.
and my sister and I spent a lot of time playing school. And so I saw a lot of those books. Even though, at that point they were at such a higher level, but I did actually look at the books and look at the math in the books. I'm not sure if that's what did it, but
Hmm.
even just science in general, I kind of trailed behind her, going to a
Hmm.
lot of different science fairs.
Yeah,
I
nice.
would go to science fairs at
Hmm.
the closest colleges to us. Actually, the closest one at that point was Berry College in Rome, Georgia. And
Wow.
so I remember going to several of those science fairs with her. I did in high school participate in, there was a math quiz bowl,
Okay.
and that was just a group of us that would meet, study, do math problems. And then certain weekends we would travel again to nearby colleges to compete
Hmm.
in these math competitions. And I grew up in a really small town, Cartersville, Georgia. It's
Hmm.
about 40 miles north of Atlanta. Um, my high school, the highest math that my high school offered at that time was pre-calculus. So
Okay.
there was no calculus opportunities for me to take calculus. I hear these advanced placement. We didn't have many advanced placement courses there. Definitely
Hmm.
not in math. Um, and I remember going to these competitions, and at that point, I didn't know what um, an integral sign was. You
Hmm.
know, some of the schools, some of the students we would compete with,
Hmm.
they attended schools where calculus was offered. They had
Yeah.
actually seen integration.
Hmm.
I had not, and so I remember coming back, saying to my teacher, I said, "Oh yeah, what was that symbol?"
Yeah.
I didn't know what that S
Oh,
meant.
no.
Um,
Uh,
but yeah, I don't really know where the math part, but I think it was just more of her curiosity.
mhm.
Every time, she would get so excited about science, she would
Right.
get so excited about discoveries.
Mhm.
Um, and I think, with math, there's still so much to learn and
Mhm.
discover. And it just kind of that's pushed me in that direction.
Wow. I have even more questions now.
Yeah.
I guess because it's and you and I know how intriguing, our perceptions of math.
Mhm.
I'm holding off. I'm trying to hold off talking about our perceptions because I'm so curious as to, what you're going to say. Um, but it's amazing when I think about the connections between math and science, and you mentioned the science fair.
Mhm.
Because as a classroom teacher, when I was a high school biology teacher, I gave a science fair. I started a science fair actually, for years,
Mhm.
and I was amazed by how much math the students were looking at. I had students who would never who maybe didn't really communicate with me, outside, and because of the science fair, they would come to me, and this is, I remember talking to a student who didn't speak as much English, right? And so these are not your students who we consider your high performers.
Right.
And so, but she came to me, we were discussing a graph. She was looking at this malaria graph, and I remember it vividly because these were just became experiences. It wasn't just a an isolated learning, but it's amazing the carryover there is between science and having that context. I'm curious about one more thing before I go into our main topic, which is, do you feel like, because when I think about the fact that science, gives you that context for understanding the why and the what in math, do you feel like, and I know you may not remember, do you feel like you were just going along with the journey, or it was more, gosh, I love math, I'm going for these extended, because when I think about learning, one of the big indicators for me of learning is really what you like to do outside of the classroom, right? And the fact that you were going for all of these things.
Um, was I enjoyed it. So I'm a proponent of, like you said, these external experiences.
Yeah,
They are so important and very important for me.
very defining.
Um, but yes, just some summer programs that I did
Mhm,
in high school that supplemented, what I got at my high school.
mhm,
Um, was I going along for the journey? I enjoyed it. I enjoyed. I wanted to learn more. I mean,
mhm,
as I mentioned, when I got to college, I did not initially come in thinking that I would major in math. But
mm,
when I got to the point where I realized that I had satisfied my math credits, I
mhm.
realized that, oh my goodness, I won't take math anymore. And that, which really, and I was like, oh no, that was not a happy feeling to me, And I
Yeah.
said, oh, that was when I realized. I said, oh gosh, I think math is
Wow.
what I really want to study, and I just
Mhm.
couldn't see myself not learning more math. Um,
Wow. And so I ask you those questions because I'm sure my son doesn't see himself doing math at all, but that's been a part of his journey. And
okay.
so I'm always looking for cues. And lately, my cue has been, well, if he doesn't resist or say no, or say, oh, I hate that, that's my cue enough. you know,
Yes.
to keep going. With kids were still figuring it out, right? Kids are still figuring it
Yeah.
out, and you still, you know, identifying and thinking of what you learn.
Mhm. Yeah, it's
But
definitely kids are still figuring out, and I think even in high school,
mhm,
I feel like there's such a push now when students are applying to college,
mhm,
uh, to know exactly what they plan to major in, and to
mm,
me, that's just as I don't see it because I'm
mhm,
like, oh, they're probably going to change their minds, and
yeah.
there's so much to explore,
Mhm,
and a lot of times. Children just don't realize how math is connected to so many different areas,
absolutely.
and not even realizing that they're doing math, or just how just the need for math. And so
Mm-mm.
I think sometimes it takes a while for someone to realize that if they want to be a math major or
Mhm,
something just related, that there's so many related areas that rely on math, um, that I think after just from your experiences, as you said,
mhm,
from your experiences, you kind of fall in and you realize, oh yeah, this I need to take more statistics or more math or
mhm.
data science because this is going to be useful to me.
Right.
Yeah.
And hopefully it's not like most people, not most, but some people I've known who realize too late that they need it, and then are scrambling to, oh, I want to do computers, but I really need to finish this math, or I want to do science, but I really need to finish this math. And I remember I used to give students these case studies, to look at, when they were in high school, they got to see, oh, where this scientist struggled with math, and he realized he had to go back and learn the math, and they were really surprised, like, oh, really? They were, not the only
Right.
one.
Yes, yes. And so, you know, I'm a department chair, interim department
Hmm.
chair
Yeah,
currently,
awesome.
and I do hear students sometimes say, "Oh, yeah, this is going to be my last math class. And I do try to encourage students, but hey, you might want to take, go on and take a little bit more math, even though you've
Mhm.
satisfied your requirements. This helps you, so much in terms of your thinking, your logical
Mhm.
reasoning. Um, there are just so many different areas that studying more math can assist you with.
Absolutely. But so today I wanted to invite you because I really wanted to talk about um, the state of math. So if you could talk about, you first talk about a little bit briefly about your experience teaching math, and if you could go into how would you describe the state of math today
Okay, that's an
based on your
excellent
experience? Yeah.
question. Yes. So we're in the post-pandemic time. So now I think I think I'll say the math community is struggling in
Mhm.
terms of um, making sure that we are proficient in math,
Mhm.
that students are getting what they need.
Mhm.
Um, find even more so now that students are coming into college underprepared
Mhm.
in math and really just not necessarily feeling they feel that they're
Mhm.
nervous.
Yeah.
Um, they need a confidence boost.
Mm.
Um, they need to review. Math is something that you may have learned it, you may have seen it before,
Mhm.
um, but you need to go back and review
Mhm.
before they move on. So I think that review is so important right now because
Mm.
there are things that they probably missed.
Mhm.
You need to fill in the gaps. Um, Math, I think, is very exciting and very relevant.
Mhm.
I, you know, I I'm encouraged by, movies where math is showcased, such,
Yeah.
Hidden Figures. I think it was
Mhm.
wonderful, just a wonderful way to
Yeah.
showcase math, um, and the importance of math. Uh,
Mhm.
but I do feel that students these days are often discouraged,
Mhm.
and because they feel that a lot of times math is seen as this is the subject that determines whether or not you're smart. I hear
Mhm.
that all the time.
Mm.
Well, I'm not,
Okay.
it just seems to, so if you're not placed in that advanced math class in middle school,
Mm.
um, then you kind of at that point start feeling,
Interesting.
oh, well, maybe I'm not as smart
Mhm.
because I didn't make the
Yeah.
advanced class.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's a terrible way because with math, maybe at sixth grade or seventh grade, you're not quite at that point. But
Mhm.
I've seen people, I've experienced it with family members who catch up.
Mhm.
We don't all learn in the same rate, the same
Right.
way, and so maybe in seventh grade you're not ready for that advanced math, but you
Mhm.
catch up, in
Wow.
6 months or so. So I think the state of math is, it's exciting, but I
Mhm.
do think we need to realize that, in this post-pandemic state, that we need to do some review to help students regain their confidence in doing math.
Mm. Wow. I have so many questions. My goodness, because my tendency is to think, when you say the word live learned it, it's very hard for me to picture when I think of learning that you just lose that like that, right? And so I always question, well, did they really learn it? And I know that being a professor, instructor, teacher, we get to see the trends over the years. And so in observing, in terms of what you've observed, I think you mentioned there was this kind of like a downward trending. And so what I'm curious about is you know, what is it about this downward trending? Do you think it's because are we expecting more? Where have we also changed? We know that students have changed, but is it that they're not performing as well and they're really unprepared, or are we expecting more? And I'm curious as to what you might have even observed as far as, what are maybe are some were some trends that you maybe society or K-12 environment was going through that you might have even observed, in the college, because I would observe trends. I'll tell you that afterwards, but I'm curious about what do you think might have also been trending, that might have
Mhm.
contributed to it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I do think with math, writing helps. So,
Mm.
what trends do I see in the classroom?
Oh.
What I see my
Mhm.
students doing, they take out their phone and
Mhm.
they take a photo of the notes
Ooh, okay.
instead of actually writing things down. And I do
Yeah,
think writing helps that
absolutely.
your memory to
Mhm.
understand the steps. And and if you're just taking a picture, and we know when we take photos on our phone, where do
Mhm.
they end up? Do they end up in an organized fashion? Not often, they don't. And
Yeah.
so that's one thing that I've noticed,
Wow.
in
That's
terms of
huge.
just the note taking aspect.
Yeah.
I also think about the fact that a lot of there's a lot of online math help, which is
Mhm.
great,
Mhm.
but it's a different approach, because once again,
Yeah.
they're not always writing something. So
Mm.
and even typing is a different type of typing if you're typing in an
Mhm.
equation.
Right.
Um, and how does that help with the retention?
Mhm.
How does that help with the learning? It's a different way of learning.
Yeah.
Um, distractions,
Mm.
distractions in the classroom, such as
Yeah.
the phones, um, which is something that I've learned and observed
Mm.
with students. So those are a few things
Those are
that
big.
I deal with when
Mhm.
with teaching. Um,
Wow.
and then, of course, AI.
Mm.
Um, again, new technologies, new developments,
Mhm.
great. How do we use them
Mhm.
so that um, it's beneficial,
Yeah.
right? So if you're solving an equation, and there are all these online equation solvers now,
Mhm.
um, it's not enough to just get the answer.
Mm-mm.
So, are you really, are students really understanding
Right.
how to get the answer, what the answer means,
Mhm.
the steps, the logic involved?
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. It's so interesting. And I know when you and I chatted briefly, we even talked about the influence of culture, right? And our trending and our culture does not contribute to learning math, right?
Right.
And I want to say, let me and just infuse some of my education observations too.
Mhm.
Writing is really important when it comes to that, right? Because I remember when I've had students doing well, and I remember having this student even come up in front of the class and explain to the class what you're doing, so that she can explain what she's doing and that they're not. And she said, "Oh, well, I would just go home and rewrite my notes." Right? And so the process of writing itself, it's going to become so much more important, um, in the future now, because we don't have as much opportunity. So the whole mechanics of it, we're talking about how the brain works, right? You're talking about motor skills being combined with visual skills, being combined with, it's a processing. It's a
Yes.
processing opportunity. Whereas you snap a picture, and the worst part of it is because they have so many resources, they are fooled into thinking that their familiarity in looking at the screen means that they know. And so they're going to be even more fooled than they've ever been before.
Hmm.
You know, and so what we
Exactly.
and so what we think is needed is not necessarily what will be needed. And the worst part of this is the way we integrate writing with the math and the requirements for it. I find it's in the most, I want to say the word useless, but I know it's not all useless. It's just in the more, and I want to say the word boring, which most kids would find it boring, but it's almost not capturing where the writing is needed, right? Because you don't always need the writing in math, and I don't like the fact that, for example, my son will just do the calculations sometimes in his head, and he doesn't like to write it down per se. And
Hmm.
sometimes it's okay to just do it in your head, right? And so
Yes.
because we don't credit the kid who is able to conceptualize things mentally and process it, we don't see that as an advancement. We have them writing in the wrong areas at the wrong time,
Hmm.
and it simply seems like it's just because it's following something formulaic, a formula that we have, right? Because we can't, we're not breaking outside the box. Whereas it's different, like you said, you're doing a science fair, they have to write things down, they have to, it's without a purpose. That's what I meant to say. All of that just to come back, you
Hmm.
know? So you really said some important things that, make sense, but it just, that's why you're here. It wouldn't have like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I know even when I was working on my dissertation,
Hmm.
and what I encourage graduate students to do is, as they work, go ahead and type it up, right? If you're working on
Hmm.
a proof,
Hmm.
once you think you have that proof completed, type it.
Yeah.
And I always found that when I'm actually typing, you write it out first, but then you start typing it again, that's when I would catch my mistakes.
Hmm.
Like, oh, or
Wow.
gaps. And I actually, this isn't quite right. I've left something out I need to add in
Hmm.
because, you know, uh, I'm missing a piece, or, the logic isn't there.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's that process of going back and reviewing and really trying to make sure that it's exact and precise. And um,
Hmm.
it really helps.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's, on one level, graduate level. I
Hmm.
would say for myself, in elementary and middle school, I noticed that, and I think it was because I enjoyed math,
Hmm.
that after the summer, when I go back, you ask the question, is it that you you never actually learned it, or that
Hmm.
you've forgotten it? I felt at that point, I always kind of cringed. I noticed that I felt like I had forgotten. So I
Hmm.
remember those first few days of the new school year. We
Hmm.
get our books, and then I'm like, yeah, I certainly did. I
Hmm.
remember we went over this, but
Right.
boy, I don't quite remember this.
Hmm.
And lucky for me, you know, I would take my book home
Hmm.
and go back and do some self review
Hmm.
because I enjoyed math. But I recognized that I said, yeah, I knew that I did learn that, but boy,
Hmm.
I'm not quite ready to go on. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I do think some of it is you do fool yourself sometimes in
Hmm.
believing that you've learned it, but sometimes I think that, math is something that you really do have to constantly review
Right.
because you're building on top of what you've already learned.
Makes
And so
sense.
if it's been 3 months
Hmm.
and you haven't been working, you haven't been doing math,
Hmm.
like you're used to doing math, and yeah, you've forgotten a little bit and you need to go back and review.
Hmm.
And if you don't do that review, then it's like you take a step forward, but then you fall back and you keep
Hmm.
falling back. And so it's harder to kind of get over that hump again, especially since, oh gosh, you think I did know how to do that. And it can
Hmm.
become frustrating, right?
Right.
And I do think that's where students become frustrated.
Yeah.
They've been exposed and they know that they've seen it. And I have students tell me all the time, I just can't perform, or I can't do this on a test, but I know how to do this. And
Mm-hmm.
um, it's a sense of frustration.
Yeah, I can see that. And I can also see more and more where students are skipping practicing, right? Like you took that initiative, you saw that need. Um, but a lot of times students will tell themselves, "Oh, I'm familiar. Oh, I'll skip that practice." You
Right.
know, and I we've been in college. I've been in college. There are
Mhm.
things that would have benefited. It's almost as if I think I would have wished having a better awareness of how I learn.
Yeah. Mhm.
And and even thinking of metacognition, the ability to think about you know you're learning on a deeper level. I'm just wondering if that's one of the bigger mark we're missing, because a lot of times I find that students don't really know what it takes, right?
Yes, I agree. Uh, you know, they say, I always remind my students, right? We're in
Mhm.
class. You need to spend 2 to 3 hours outside of class
Mhm.
reviewing the material. And I just don't think that really happens that often
Mm.
anymore. The time, spent out of class,
Mhm.
it's really needed to
Mhm.
get that deeper understanding.
Mm. It's like an understanding of the consequences, right? We do consequences in so many other areas of our life except in learning. um,
Yes,
what are the consequences of that lack of carryover? um,
exactly.
mm,
And I do, and I advocate for. I like group work
mhm,
in class. I think
mhm,
that's good. Um, but I also think during the group work,
mhm,
you do learn things, but sometimes you can once again fool yourself into thinking that you know it when it was actually one of your group members who
mm.
really helped you get to a certain point. And
Yeah.
that's why that time outside of class, I believe, is so important, because a lot
Mhm,
of times that's going to be so. I think you need group work, but I do think you need some individual work as well.
mhm.
I said you need both,
Absolutely.
just to really make sure that
Right.
you understand,
Mhm.
and that you're not being carried along with the group, so
Right.
that when test time comes,
Mhm.
where you do have to perform solo,
Mhm.
you can do it.
Hmm. Yep. Absolutely. Because it's the group knows, right, collectively, but you
Yes,
individually don't.
exactly, exactly.
Wow. So I'm so curious as to, and I love the writing example you gave, because I even teaching high school biology, for years, I got to observe what was happening on the elementary and middle school level that affected eventually what happened when they went to the college, the high school level, right? And the example that stands out to me all the time is, um, just for that short period of time when they took phonics out, when students got to me at the high school level, they couldn't really break down the science words anymore, right? Because I would have them read, they would read a word, and even without me, it's like, oh, if you have a hard time, pronouncing, I would have them so break it down, and then they had that challenge of breaking it down, right?
Mhm.
So I'm curious as to what else you might have observed, um, that in terms of trends over the years, that might have carried over to where we are today in math, because those trendings are really important. I mean, as a teacher, I used to know which class the student had before me in the last grade for the whole year, right? Depending on
Mm,
which teacher they came from, you would
mhm.
see how they did based on what was emphasized. Because biology is one of those very, it's an applied science that we often teach first, but I think we should teach closer to the end, because it's applied. What we
Okay.
teach is like it's not. And so it depends. Some people can teach it like it's not. You know, so I'm just curious as to if there were any other trends you
Any
observed.
other trends? Well, I'm not sure if I'm trying to think of other trends that I've observed.
Mm-hmm.
I teach a number of first year college students, just in the general education courses,
Mm-hmm.
um, and as well as I teach some major courses. But those first year students, um, I'll say just one. I won't necessarily say I've observed this, but I know that there's
Mm-hmm.
been a lot of talk in the mathematics community about uh, your first college course.
Mm-hmm.
Should that be college algebra, or should
Mm-hmm.
we rethink? Should it be something else? And in terms of trends, there's a community that is really advocating for data science.
Mm-hmm.
So with the amount of data that we're
Mm-hmm.
producing, and just where we are
Mm-hmm.
in society right now,
Mm-hmm.
data science is definitely trending.
Mm-hmm.
Here at Central, the our largest math course for
Mm-hmm.
incoming freshmen is
Mm-hmm.
college algebra, which we're finding that a lot of the students are struggling in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so maybe
Mm-hmm.
with the trend towards data science, we hear so much about it
Mm-hmm.
now. Perhaps that first course should be moved a little bit more towards data science.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly that's an area that is going to touch on so many majors, that's needed
Right.
in so many majors.
Mm-hmm.
And so perhaps we should rethink,
Mm-hmm.
instead of having, you know, we have over 30 sections of college algebra each
Mm-hmm.
fall. Um, Maybe we should be thinking, okay, perhaps some of these students would be better served with data
Mm-hmm.
science.
Yeah,
Um,
I like
and I
that.
think that's just a trend that we're just seeing in our society, and maybe we
Mm-hmm.
just need to rethink, given how students are. I mean, of course, I would, I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to dismiss algebra
Mm-mm.
and what students are learning from that process,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, there are some other skills that we
Wow.
could also emphasize.
I
So
love that.
that's definitely a big topic in the
Yeah,
math community right now.
that's great. It's interesting that you said that too for several reasons. One is I could almost see um, people thinking that you would need more understanding to go towards data science versus algebra. But I think data science is just a great way to place to start, just for a lot of reasons, because you're talking about integrating um, critical thinking and thinking skills that sometimes students come with already that may not show up in algebra, because algebra is something completely different. And I
Mhm.
could see data science giving them an opportunity to build in the why, right? Why is this
Exactly.
important?
Hmm.
Why learn it? Where they can actually um, observe the trends themselves, right? And they could even build the equation themselves, right? Because a lot of times we think we need to hand it to the students when
Exactly.
they're capable of making these same observations. So that,
Hmm.
and so we end up putting something higher on a pedestal, as if it's higher learning compared to, or they need to work up to that, not realizing that it requires a basic type of processing skills where, if proper facilitated, right, you can help students to attain that way of thinking that maybe they might enjoy and become interested enough in the math itself.
Yes, I completely agree. They can relate the data science to so many different areas,
Mm-hmm.
deciding what domain do I want to focus on.
Right.
um, get you have that hook, right, of
Mm-hmm.
piquing their interest,
Absolutely.
and then of course there's going to be probably at some point some algebra that's going to come up with
Mm-hmm.
what they're doing, but also our students are very computer savvy,
Mhm.
So the computational aspect of it,
Yeah.
being able to bring that in and
Mhm.
getting students involved,
Mhm.
doing that background, you know,
Awesome.
sometimes not even, there's so many different, um, I guess, packages, coding packages that, really
Mhm.
at all different levels, depending on your skill set with coding and programming.
Yeah.
So I think that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I hear about that trend.
Mhm.
Still hear about the trend to encourage students to uh, go take calculus in high school. And
Mhm.
so I'll say that, another group that's very much a proponent for, um, no, still have the students take that
Mhm.
highest
Mhm.
level, which is typically calculus,
Okay.
that they can take in high school,
Mhm.
um, because uh, a number of people feel that if students take calculus, that just leads to more success in the future, more success
Mhm.
when they go to college.
Mhm.
So, that's that's a different perspective, but certainly,
Yeah.
there's a group of people who push that as well. And sometimes I think that part comes back to the confidence boosting
Mhm.
part.
Mhm.
Just, students don't shy away from calculus and still feel that, um, yes, I have the ability. I have the
Mhm.
ability to do calculus.
Yeah.
Sometimes I at least here, at Central, students are really scared of calculus. I just
Mhm.
finished a project that was really focusing on, uh, building co-requisites in to help
Mhm.
students through pre-calculus and calculus. And
Wow.
these were primarily for STEM majors.
Mhm.
Um, but uh, it becomes very difficult for students to do well in their major, their STEM major,
Mhm.
if they, have these difficulties, particularly at calculus and
Mhm.
getting through calculus.
Yeah.
So this philosophy is, well, encourage students to take calculus while they're in high school,
Mhm.
um, so that they have that goal and that they feel that, yes, I have the ability
Mhm.
to do calculus.
Yeah. I'm so curious as to your perspective on that trend because I feel like I could do a whole podcast episode on calculus. And a lot of it too is when I look at the think of the dynamics and even when I think about my own experience, loving math and doing well in math until I got to college calculus. What it makes me
Mhm.
wonder now though is whether or not um and you can tell me your opinion on this. I wonder whether or not that thought comes from the fact that and may not be and people may not make that connection, but I wonder if it comes from the fact that when you're in high school, you have multiple levels of guidance, right? Usually teachers in high school, you're doing that for the whole year, are a little bit more careful in walking you through that, right? Whereas
Mhm.
in college, you're expected a certain level of independence, and you may not necessarily know where your own holes are, right?
Yeah.
In that, and it's taught in a little bit more of an advanced way. And not only that, when I took that calculus, it was a grad student. And
Mhm.
so it's almost as if you were teaching yourself.
Right.
And that's been my experience with calculus, and which is why, I make a different effort with, even with my son the way he's educated in second, I really want to observe, what goes on so I could see, you know, is it just the math itself or is it just the way it's taught, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah. Um, it is hard for me
Mm-hmm.
to I've seen, because so calculus can be taught in so many different ways, and I've observed students to come in who where they were taught understanding the why,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
whereas other students who have come in, um, taught the steps,
Mm-hmm.
not really understanding the why behind it, but they know
Mm-hmm.
the steps. They know how to
Yeah.
take a derivative. They know the rules, the calculus rules.
Yeah.
Um,
Makes sense.
and which one is going to, I think, balance is really needed.
Mm-hmm.
You need the balance. But I think it's hard for, you're for the instructor, you're trying to balance getting through the material,
Mm-hmm.
right? Get through the material,
Yeah.
um, and teach a little bit of the why, but also make sure that they understand the steps.
Mm-hmm.
And but getting back to your question about, what do I think students should, um, I do think it's good to give students, if you can give them a choice.
Mm.
Um, and if we can help students understand that, if they don't get to calculus in high school, it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
That is absolutely okay, and it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you're not smart.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you have time to take calculus
Mm-hmm.
when you get to college,
Yeah.
and that everyone learns at a different pace,
Mm-hmm.
in a different way.
Absolutely.
So I do think it's good for students to have some flexibility,
Mm-hmm.
but the main thing is to make sure that their uh, their confidence level
Yeah.
stays high, and that they
Wow.
still want to take more math, to explore more math,
Mm-hmm.
at their own pace.
Wow.
That would be my recommendation if I could talk to high school students.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's big. Confidence level stays high. It's wow. You brought up something there that's near and dear to my heart. Um, One of the big reasons I took my son out of school and homeschooled him was because of the math.
Mhm.
Because I started realizing that at that level, he needed to be taught in a way, and I wanted to continue the trending towards him understanding why he's doing it and not algorithmically. My
Mhm.
biggest concern was even with the new Common Core, if you're used to, if you don't quite understand the why yourself, and even when a teacher might say, oh, the Common Core tries to encourage you to understand that there's more than one way, it may not necessarily, that algorithmic way of thinking can go from one way to two ways to three ways without necessarily still understanding the why.
Mhm.
And so, from having prepared him to think a certain way and then seeing things trending differently from what I wanted, I took him out. I did a Singapore math with him, just really teaching him to think and getting him back to understanding the why, right? Because then he was going through. I was like, wait a second, why you don't know the table? And people go from one extreme to the other, right? They think that because you know they think, okay, we're not going to do rote, but you need to understand what you're doing, but you do need to know your table still in order to understand how to do the fractions. So I was able to, I in addition to teaching him Singapore math, I put him in a Russian school of math. And and of course in the beginning I started, I was observing what they were doing and why, and realizing that when I compared the book, the book we use, um and I started homeschooling from fourth grade. When I compared what he was doing in fourth grade, um, the fourth grade math book with what he was doing there, I said, oh, he's doing seventh grade in
Hmm.
fourth grade. And then I started to realize what they were doing. They were helping him to get to the application, using things that were complex, that required simple skills. I was like, wow, this is so amazing, right?
Yeah.
And then I also started seeing, oh, he's doing, of course I would peek at his problems now and again. I was like, and he doesn't realize he's doing physics. he's answering physics problems without the formula. Because a lot of times, if you ask a student, how far would you go if you're traveling this, miles per whatever, conceptually, they'll know if they need to multiply, and they'll know if they need to divide.
Yeah. Hmm.
So having him do that alongside, me going through Singapore math was enough incentive for me to help him understand, hey, let's repeat your tables today once, or let's repeat it twice, and let's, here's the why, and here's how you doing those fractions there will help you to understand what's going on. I'm sorry, you memorizing your table will help you understand that why over there.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and so we, like you said, we need a healthy balance between the why and the rote,
In the road, yes,
right? Not going from one extreme to the other. Um,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
it's so interesting.
but the other observations I made was teaching chemistry, at a high school level, and getting to see the students who didn't understand the fractions had a hard time doing, for example, mole calculations.
Okay.
And then those who did it algorithmically couldn't really carry it over to, you know, conceptually what they needed to do because they were so reliant on writing out. And I would see them write this long, complex form. I was like, oh, what is that? you know, like they just write this wrong form. And I was like, I
Yeah.
still didn't
Yeah.
understand what they got and why they got it.
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know? Sorry, I know it's not laughing, but it's just, interesting thinking back.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Writing out a formula, and I see that sometimes, and I just, I have to ask the student, yeah, do you understand what this means, and does this make sense? And
Yeah.
and actually just having the skills to go back and look and realize, does this make sense? What
Mhm.
you what you've written. Um, yeah.
I'm curious as to what you observed though, in that trying to help them understand the process. What do you observe? I mean, what are some challenges that they have? Um, or just generally, what do you observe in students um, when you try to help them to change, whether it's their view, their orientation, like what are some challenges and what are some things you try to help them with?
Mhm. Um, well, they do ask often about the why. Why do I need to do this?
Yeah.
Um, and it is challenging to help for them to understand that, hey, this is going to help you in so many other aspects of your life because you're
Mhm.
developing these logical reasoning skills, right?
Mhm.
Um, you might not have to do solve some type of use trigonometry, for instance. You might
Mhm.
not, but just the process that we're going through is really going to transfer over and help you in terms of problem solving
Mhm.
skills in, you know, just a variety of areas. So,
Yeah.
so that's a big question. Why do I have to do this?
Mhm.
Also, um, not having everything be about a grade as
Mm.
opposed to just wanting to learn and
Mm.
just understanding and increasing your knowledge and um, you know um, the points and the grade.
Mm.
Uh, that's always a big one.
Yeah.
And really stressing to the students that it really does help if you do a little bit every day
Yeah.
as opposed to waiting to the end of the
Mm.
semester and going into panic mode.
Mhm.
And I try to be flexible, reopening assignments,
Mm.
and that can only help so much, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you have to do a little bit. And
Yeah.
again, with math, you're building, and um, it's so much easier if you just start off strong and just do a that would help so much. Start off strong at the beginning of the semester and just do your studying, do a little bit every day.
Wow.
Yeah, if I could get that across, I would feel
Mm-hmm.
really good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think I could see, the need for building an awareness of how you learn. And I can also see, in terms of us changing the infrastructure to really help students understand the why,
Mhm.
right? Connected to it. Maybe there'll be a little bit more buy-in. I mean, we're talking about being in an age where we're competing for so many other whys, right?
Yes, that's true. Mhm.
I don't know how that'll go, but I think there is such a greater need now, because the buy-in for college, we can't afford to have students see the consequences until it's too late,
Yeah,
you know
absolutely. Hmm.
and you mentioned even thinking about introduce them to data science initially. I could see that being helpful now because there's so much carryover to I guess just about all the subject areas,
Exactly.
right?
Yes. Hmm.
um that maybe might give them a taste of, because I find it sometimes often, because they're on a journey too, right? They're in an identity type of journey where they're figuring out what they want. And so I could see that even that exposure to so many different things, allowing room for them to maybe direct them early on, you know
Yeah. Um, I definitely think I think that should be explored more,
hmm
and I think more and more people are uh, starting to look at that.
yeah.
Um, so we'll see where that goes. I am as someone who is more of a statistician, that really excites me. We
hmm
hear sometimes. Uh, my fellow statisticians, we laugh because we're like data science, but that's not new. We've been doing that for a long time. But now the
yeah.
buzzword is data science. I know it's a little different
Yeah.
because sometimes in statistics you don't really emphasize. It's not all emphasized in one package. The
hmm
computing, um, the domain knowledge, right?
yeah.
And the math and stat parts. But I'm glad though. I mean, I
hmm
definitely think it's a positive to see um, to just see that data science has been embraced,
hmm
and so many people are recognizing the need for training and
hmm
learning,
yeah.
um, and it does seem to bring a new level of excitement.
hmm
So I definitely think that's positive.
wow. Yeah, it's almost like, oh yeah, we need the rest of the world to catch up, right? And you
Yes.
see the influence of technology on society. It's funny until you mentioned it the second time. I was like, yeah, I dabbled in that a little bit, because when I first started my research project, I explored, ArcGIS online, and I took a little. They had this free data science, and I said, oh, this is. I started it, and I was like, you know what? It's a completely other area of expertise. The amount of hours it would need for me to master this, it's just better I just have somebody else
Mhm.
do it. I know in part of the project, well, I had some students dabble in it, but I guess until the world really needs it in terms of when I say needs it, I should clarify, can monetize it, right? Because
Yeah.
that's what is a driver for so many things that are fairly basic already, but sometimes it's waiting for the world to catch up and hopefully drive change, you know, back
Mhm.
and forth. Um, but I think that the why, absolutely. I want to ask you, I'm also going to see if there are any questions. What in your observations, what are some things, other than what you said, if you can think of other things we should change about the way and how we teach math? Um, and I wrote a question there, and I'm trying to understand my own handwriting. what, are, what are some things you could think about if you take a moment? What would advice and you would give? Hmm.
About how we teach math.
Hmm.
Um, well, I well, there's and this is just, these are not necessarily my original ideas, but just what
Hmm.
um, I've seen, I've heard. One thing is, some things I'll just say is it's driven by how many students are in your class.
Hmm.
If they're smaller classes, you have a little bit more flexibility, I think, in terms
Hmm.
of how you move through the material, and just
Hmm.
um, might be a little bit easier to do some more innovative
Yeah.
approaches.
Mm.
But project-based learning in math, um, that's definitely an approach that a lot of people have advocated for.
Hmm.
So having students do projects, particularly in calculus. I know that's something that some of our
Mm.
faculty have tried to integrate into calculus.
Hmm.
Um, but again, these real world connections.
Hmm.
Um, moving students out of the classroom
Mm.
to either do, for instance, some data collection, bring in,
Hmm.
something that's different that takes them out of their seats where, they're used to thinking of, math as, sitting, taking
Mm.
notes. So I think,
Love that.
changing the structure of the
Hmm.
class, having students be more interactive. I know that some of our newly hired academic coaches have come to me with a few ideas about, yeah, I really just think, students need to feel more engaged in the math
Hmm.
class.
Yeah.
Um, so I think the more engagement, the more we can get the students out of their seats, coming to the board, or maybe even going out. Like you said, relating it to physics, doing some type of
Hmm.
something that where they're trying to figure out, how long it would take to travel
Hmm.
to, somewhere, or an object to travel.
Yeah.
Um, I think that would be helpful. I
Wow.
think the engagement. I also, think that it's good to. And one thing that I try to do is to bring in a little bit of history, um,
Mm.
to really encourage. We hear more and more people talk about belonging in
Hmm.
math, right?
Mm.
Um, and people have started really exploring this more.
Hmm.
Um, so the two African American high school students who discovered new ways to prove the Pythagorean theorem. So
Hmm.
when I taught the second half of college algebra and trig
Hmm.
in 2024, I was so excited. And I would say that is probably the best lecture that I had. I pulled up
Hmm.
a video talking
Nice.
about the students,
Hmm.
and with their explaining how they came up with this proof.
Yeah.
And my students were so intrigued. That
Hmm.
was that was my I feel like, again, that was the best class that I had, because they were so excited to see these two African American high school girls who had come
Yeah.
up with this new proof.
Yeah.
Um, and and so they could see themselves, and I said, okay, good. Yeah. So now
Hmm.
they understand, yeah, the Pythagorean theorem. This is something I can do.
Awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
I was so excited because I went back and I sent a text to two of my friends in California, and I said, "Guess what I just did?"
Mm-hmm.
I showed this to my students, and they really enjoyed this, and they were really tuned in.
Yeah.
And Yeah, it was great. I
Wow.
really just think that was just a moment of seeing all of my students being excited about math and about the
Yeah.
Pythagorean theorem.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. There's so many things that concern me too. I love the examples you gave because it really speaks to process in terms of how to get there. A lot of times we don't necessarily know how to get there. Because we might say, oh, include critical thinking, and then the objective is, oh, kids, today we will think critically, right? As opposed to actually doing the critical thinking.
Yes.
And having someone who or maybe we think it's okay that if someone thinks algorithmically, that we have them create these critical thinking, and we don't quite understand the type of skills needed to go there, and a lot of times it requires a way of thinking.
Hmm.
And the question is, how do you, if you're leading this way, spot that way of thinking, right?
Mm.
Because again, we're talking about repeated year after year decision making that leads you down, not really seeming to have a solution, right? I think, I think for me, one of the things I was going to say something that from what you said is, oh, one of the so I write notes. One of the thing that I think I can see hindering us is um seeing math as always right and wrong, right? There's a right answer, a wrong answer,
Mhm.
because that's the complete opposite of what you said with the students, discovering, oh, there's another way to do this,
Yeah.
right? And I could see, us focusing on the need to simply have this right answer. And I know that that's why they came up with the, oh, there's two ways now, there's three ways, right?
Yeah.
But it's still very, I'm trying to figure out what's the word to use. It's like more of the same. How is that? It's still stiff
Okay.
in that way.
Hmm.
It's just more of the same couched differently, right?
Right. Right.
um and let's see.
I think sometimes people, oh, and I don't know if I probably can't even come up with the term, but some people have the approach to teaching, just giving the problem and just letting the students work and come up with
Mm-hmm.
the solution. Um, and and so they're not so concerned about coming up with the correct solution, but more of the process of how the student is thinking through the problem. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so, but that kind of that goes back to some approaches are easier when you have a smaller class,
Right.
as opposed to just a class of 30 32 students we have.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's tough.
Mm-hmm.
That's a tough problem. Um,
Yeah.
the right answer versus your your thinking through,
Right.
um, yeah, the critical thinking part. And
Yeah.
I don't have the best answer
Yeah.
for how to
No,
go
it's
about that.
fine.
Yeah.
I mean, these are great. I think what you said was really important, because what I've observed too is the class size, right? And what I've observed in even obviously in the black schools, from talking to students who have graduated, you might see there's a number of students posted on the website, but that's not the reality of their classrooms, right?
Exactly.
All of these places where they say they pour money into the system, where they say they're giving money, have big classrooms. And no matter what and how much money they've poured into these places, That hasn't changed. That essential bit
Yes.
hasn't changed.
Mhm.
And so what ends up happening a lot of times is we pretend we're doing making all these solutions, but still not really changing where it matters, right?
Yes.
Which is in the classroom size, because it does matter,
Agree.
you know.
Yes, that's so true. That, being able to just stop and kind of give that one-on-one when you realize that there's a student that needs a
Mhm.
little bit more attention. Um, you know, it makes a difference. Even I think in terms of students' willingness to participate,
Mhm.
um, and you have to be willing to um, you have to feel comfortable enough to make a mistake. If you
Mhm.
want to have students come to the board, and students have to be okay with that. And I think it's so much easier make a mistake in front of a few students. But if it's
Mm.
that's hard. That's very hard. Um, it's hard for students to feel you know have that level of comfort.
Mm. Wow. Wow. Um, I'm also thinking too of the scenario where, you know, you're going to, where someone is saying, okay, think about it, right? There's only so much you can do. It's going to be dependent on your experience that you bring, right?
Yes.
And so you can think yourself to the ground, hour two, and nothing, right? Because you haven't had an experience, you haven't been giving those list of skills, or acquire those list of skills, or the thinking doesn't really utilize, students' own experiences, right?
Hmm.
So in other words, it's not facilitated well, and we often think, oh, it's the student not thinking versus, well, we just need to figure out um, what are the best ways to facilitate thinking.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
true. Um, yeah, and with math, sometimes there is a certain uh, there's certain um, foundational information.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and sometimes I have to be very careful just with the math language,
Mm.
notation,
Mm-hmm.
symbols.
Yeah.
Sometimes I really have to catch myself,
Mm-hmm.
and I have to stress to my students, let me know if you've never seen this. Some students have, some students have not. Uh,
Mm.
so
Yeah.
I often teach an elementary statistics class, and
Mm-hmm.
so we have the sigma notation for
Mm-hmm.
summation. Some have seen it, some have not,
Yeah.
and so if you're just confused by the symbols, the
Mm-hmm.
language, the facilitator has to be very careful that we're all
Right.
speaking the same language when we are presenting math.
Right.
That's
Makes sense.
yeah.
Wow. Well, I just have one last question. I'm going to just pause for a second and see if there are any questions or anyone with. I don't think I see. Okay. Just thought I'd see. Okay. So, yeah, we are live. I don't see any questions. Okay. So, what are some recommendations? Any other recommendations um, you have about the direction we should go in improving mathematics in the U.S. and what it's better in the K-12 space, the college space, both either. You
Mhm.
know, what recommendations, other recommendations you would make?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I certainly, as I mentioned, I really believe in enrichment programs.
Mm-hmm.
And the more enrichment, activities because it's so hard to get everything done in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
I really felt that I benefited from that, and I
Mm-hmm.
still think that there's a program here at Central for
Mm-hmm.
incoming freshmen, the
Mm-hmm.
Aspiring Eagles, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and
Nice.
so students can take math. They can take a math class
Mm-hmm.
over the summer before
Okay.
their first semester.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love, I've said this before, and of course, if we had all the money in the world, but to see that program expanded,
Mm-hmm.
um, so that more students could come in and actually take, um, even if it's not their first math class, but um, some type of, can call it a bridge course or
Mm-hmm.
prep course. I do think we need to be careful with the language. We don't,
Mm-hmm.
the whole, remedial, I'm not saying,
Mm.
would not want to
Yeah.
call it that, but just some type of supplemental math
Mm-hmm.
um, would be really helpful. And
Mm-hmm.
and again, even the summer, I mentioned that, when I was, still in middle school, I felt that I had this summer drain where I
Mm-hmm.
kind of lost my skills over the summer.
Mm-hmm.
Any type of summer enrichment
Mm-hmm.
for students, I think that would be so helpful just
Right.
to keep the mathematical thinking, the mathematical learning going,
Mm-hmm.
so that students, when they come back for the new year, uh, they feel that they're ready and that they haven't forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so any
Mm-hmm.
type of enrichment,
Yeah.
I would definitely think that that would be a good direction to go in.
Wow. And that's an important point. The enrichment part, because enrichment costs, right? Especially for families who can't afford it. That's not going to happen for them. Oftentimes, it will happen. Enrichment will happen for people who can't afford to pay for enrichment.
Mhm.
Because I know because we pay for enrichment,
Yes,
um,
absolutely.
and
Yeah,
we.
I was very fortunate, and I did some summer enrichments when I was in high school. I found
Mhm.
a few programs. But you're absolutely right. There aren't enough for
Mhm.
everyone, and it does cost. So
Mhm.
that's
It
definitely
costs.
a barrier. But I
Wow.
do think that I also uh, I think as advisors, as professors, instructors, teachers, parents, uh, to stress to maintain a positive attitude towards math,
Mhm.
because our children, our students,
Mhm.
are listening and watching.
Right.
And I do experience this, that students just have often develop this negative attitude towards math,
Mhm.
and it comes from, perhaps their parents didn't have a positive experience with math.
Mhm.
um, and so the more we can
Wow.
promote math in a positive light,
Mhm.
that's kind of my mission, to really uh, bring a positive message about math,
Mm.
about how math
Wow.
is useful in
Yeah.
so many different ways. I think that would just really help in students to feel empowered to take math and to move through a math class, and to just want to learn, and
Mhm.
to help them have, I want to help students have better experiences with math.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's so important you said that, because so many times, our society doesn't see our attitudes towards something affects, other people's engagement and our students. And oftentimes we feel the need to express, oh, I wasn't good at that, and oh, this was not good for me. And the continuous need to express that negativity,
Mhm.
you know, reinforces that it's okay to be negative about it, and people
Exactly.
don't realize, and especially the unintentional people, right? People, it's not their intention, but
Exactly.
sometimes we just have to, because the glass was half empty for us, you know it's like we don't realize we're taking away the opportunity for it to be half full, because we're projecting that negative experience, we're projecting that negative perspective, we're projecting that negativity, and and I know it's hard, you can't be more than who you are, right?
Right. Mhm.
But that is part of the battle, the thinking, we're battling the thinking, even as instructors, to
Yes.
get children from A to B, like you said. And this is something we have to remember. It's not all going to be covered in the classroom, because I got to see, even though I like the class my son is in, I got to see, how, wow, when it comes to certain topics, they skipped over. I was like, wait a second, that's really important. You're just not going to be able to cover it all. And so, it's why, I have him in, you know, getting additional help, a couple times a week, so that he doesn't have those gaps,
Right.
and that was the biggest thing, having those gaps are, is like, how do you have gaps already and you just started?
Yeah.
How you haven't even gone in the middle of elementary, you have gaps, like that's ridiculous.
That's yeah.
Yeah. And so those large classrooms and all these factors, um wow. Well, any more takeaways before we end? I really appreciate, this was amazingly insightful. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for the opportunity. Now, it was good to talk about, just to talk about math, and to
Mm-hmm.
be able to talk about the state of math, and um, it's something I feel very passionately about, and I hope that I'm projecting this onto my students, and
Absolutely.
I appreciate your interest, and thank you for inviting me.
Oh,
So
thank you for joining. I mean, obviously this conversation could go on and on, on and on. And I'm going to make myself stop now. So thank you so much, Dr. Weems, for joining Learning for Truth and Love. And if you all enjoy this podcast, please like and follow, so that you can, hear about the next one. Thank you.
thank you.
I'll press stop.